Most people begin a diet believing that the moment they cut calories, their body will immediately start burning belly fat. But that's not how human metabolism works. The body has a very specific order in which it uses energy, and fat, especially stubborn belly fat, is never the first fuel it reaches for. So the real question isn't just how long you can diet, but how long it actually takes before your body even allows fat burning to begin. Understanding this gap between effort and results is the key to breaking the cycle of frustration that so many people fall into. Because your body isn't a simple machine. It's a sophisticated energy management system built for survival, not fast weight loss. And until you understand how hormones, insulin, and stored fuel really operate inside your body, you'll keep dieting harder without seeing the changes you deserve. This is where science gives us clarity. When you give your body the right conditions, it knows exactly how to unlock stored belly fat. But when you give it the wrong conditions, it will fight you every step of the way. Your body burns energy in a strict order, and belly fat is one of the last reserves it taps into. To understand why, you have to look at how your metabolism was designed for survival, not convenience. When food was scarce for most of human history, the body needed a reliable system to manage fuel in a way that protected life during periods of famine. So, it created a hierarchy of energy sources, using the easiest and safest fuel first, and saving the most valuable reserves for last. This is why belly fat doesn't simply disappear the moment someone decides to diet. Even if you feel motivated and determined, your body isn't responding to your motivation. It is responding to biology, hormones, and the order in which different fuels are stored and released. The first fuel your body turns to is the glucose circulating in your bloodstream, because it's immediately available and simple to use. If you've recently eaten, especially carbohydrates, your body will burn through that fuel before touching anything stored. It's only after this quick access energy is used up that the body begins to draw from glycogen, which is stored sugar in the liver and muscles. Most people carry enough glycogen to last many hours, and in some cases, an entire day, depending on activity levels and diet. This stage is important because as long as glycogen is available, your body still has no reason to access fat stores. Glycogen is easier to convert to energy, and the body always chooses the path of least resistance. This is why someone can be in a calorie deficit for several days, yet see no noticeable change in belly fat. They're burning energy, but not the energy they hope to burn. Only when glycogen stores fall significantly does the body finally consider switching to fat as the primary fuel. But even here, the body doesn't jump straight to belly fat. Fat is stored all over the body, and the release of that fat depends largely on hormonal conditions, especially insulin. If insulin is high, the body locks its fat stores tightly, no matter how few calories you're eating. This is because insulin's main job is to store energy. When it's elevated, the body interprets this as a signal that there's plenty of food coming in, so it should continue to store fat for later instead of burning it. Many people diet without realizing their insulin is still too high for fat burning to begin. They may be eating less, but if they're eating frequently or consuming foods that spike insulin, fat remains inaccessible. This is why belly fat, which is often linked to high insulin and hormonal imbalance, becomes even more stubborn over time. It isn't resistant because the body refuses to burn it. It's resistant because the required hormonal shift hasn't taken place. Even after the body transitions into fat burning, the fat around the belly is typically not the first to go. Different fat deposits respond differently depending on genetics, hormone sensitivity, stress levels, and overall metabolic health. Visceral fat, the fat around the organs, may begin to shrink before the superficial fat you see on your abdomen. Subcutaneous belly fat, the fat just under the skin, can be especially slow to respond because it often requires sustained periods of low insulin and consistent metabolic balance before the body feels safe enough to release it. In many cases, the body targets fat from other areas, arms, legs, face, before touching the central fat stored near the abdomen. This can be confusing and discouraging, especially when someone feels like they're working hard, without seeing results in the area they care about the most. But understanding the body's natural order helps remove the frustration. Your system isn't failing. It is following a deeply wired biological strategy. This is also why short-term dieting rarely produces the kind of belly fat reduction people hope for. Most diets are too brief, too inconsistent, or too focused on calorie restriction without addressing the deeper hormonal signals controlling fat release. Without lowering insulin and without staying in a state where fat burning is sustained long enough, belly fat remains untouched. Your body will always prioritize burning through glucose and glycogen first because it is efficient and safe. Only afterward, and only under the right hormonal conditions, will it gradually begin to tap into the more protected fat stored around your midsection. Understanding this hierarchy doesn't just explain why belly fat is slow to burn. It also gives clarity about what the body actually needs in order to reach that stage in the first place. Dieting alone doesn't guarantee fat burning, because insulin levels must first fall low enough for fat release to begin. This is one of the most misunderstood truths in weight loss. And it's the reason many people work incredibly hard, yet see almost no change in the one area they want to shrink the most. When you decide to diet, you naturally expect that eating less will force your body to burn fat. It feels logical. Fewer calories should mean your body turns to stored fuel. But the body doesn't operate on simple math. It operates on hormonal instructions. Insulin is one of the primary hormones that dictates whether your body stores fat or releases it. When insulin is high, the body is in storage mode, even if you're eating fewer calories. When insulin is low, the body is finally allowed to access fat stores. This means fat loss isn't controlled by willpower, discipline, or calorie counting. It's controlled by your hormonal environment. Most people spend their entire day in a state where insulin never falls low enough for fat burning to start. They might skip a meal, eat less at dinner, or choose lower calorie foods. But if they're eating frequently or consuming foods that trigger insulin spikes, the body remains locked in. Storage mode. Even foods that seem healthy, like fruits, grains, or low-fat snacks, can create an insulin response strong enough to prevent fat release. Because of this, the assumption that dieting equals fat burning becomes a painful illusion. People feel deprived, hungry, and frustrated. But the hormonal conditions their body needs for fat burning are never actually achieved. They end up in a metabolic limbo where they're eating less, but still not accessing the belly fat they want to lose. Insulin acts like a gatekeeper. When it's elevated, the gate to your fat store stays shut. When it begins to fall, the gate slowly opens, allowing fat to be released and burned as fuel. But insulin doesn't drop simply because you're consuming fewer calories. It drops when you stop stimulating it through frequent eating, sugary foods, and refined carbohydrates. It drops when your liver finally begins to clear out stored glucose, and no new surge of incoming energy arrives to trigger insulin production. This is the reason why longer intervals between meals, lowering carbohydrate intake, and giving your body breaks from constant digestion are far more effective for fat loss than simply reducing calories at random. Many diets fail because they encourage constant eating, snacks, small meals, mini meals, frequent grazing. These patterns keep insulin elevated all day long. Even if the total calories are reduced, the hormonal message never changes. The body continues storing and refuses to release fat. In contrast, when someone eats less frequently, insulin has time to fall. When someone avoids sugar or high glycemic foods, insulin stays lower. When someone gives the body a break between meals instead of constantly pushing food into the system, insulin gradually declines. This shift is what activates fat burning from the inside. Belly fat especially requires lower insulin levels to release. This type of fat is closely tied to insulin resistance, meaning the cells around the abdominal area are more resistant to insulin signal. When insulin resistance is high, the pancreas produces even more insulin to compensate. This creates a cycle where belly fat becomes even more difficult to lose because it exists in a hormonal environment that constantly reinforces its storage. So when someone tries to diet without addressing the insulin issue, they are fighting biology itself. Their body is not confused. It is doing exactly what it is being instructed to do by insulin. Another important factor is that calorie restriction without insulin reduction often slows metabolism. The body senses a drop in energy intake and responds by conserving energy. This means you feel more tired. Your body burns fewer calories and fat loss becomes even harder. But when insulin is low, the body doesn't feel threatened by the calorie deficit. Instead, it sees fat as a safe and abundant fuel source and begins to use it steadily. This is why people who lower their insulin levels often report more stable energy, less hunger, and a more consistent release of fat over time. Understanding the role of insulin changes everything about how you approach dieting. Instead of asking how little you can eat, the more powerful question becomes how you can create the hormonal environment that allows fat to be released. It shifts the focus from deprivation to strategy. It explains why some people can eat less and not lose fat, while others can eat the same amount or even slightly more, but burn fat more effectively because their insulin levels allow it. When insulin finally drops, the body doesn't need to be forced to burn fat. It naturally turns to stored energy as it was designed to do. The early phase of dieting mostly burns stored sugar, not stored fat. And this single fact explains why so many people feel discouraged when they don't see immediate changes in their belly area. When you first reduce your food intake, your body doesn't instantly respond by dipping into fat reserves. Instead, it turns to the most accessible and quickest source of energy available, glycogen. Glycogen is stored sugar kept primarily in the liver and muscles, and your body treats it like a ready-to-use emergency fuel tank. It's easy to access, easy to convert, and requires almost no hormonal shift to burn. As long as glycogen is present, your body will always use it first before reaching for stored fat. This means that even if you feel like you've been dieting hard for a couple of days, the changes happening inside your body are nowhere near the fat-burning stage you expect. You're burning energy, but the energy being burned is mostly stored sugar, not the belly fat you're hoping to target. Most people underestimate how much glycogen they carry. A typical adult can store roughly a day's worth of energy in glycogen, depending on their activity level, diet, and metabolic health. If you've been eating carbohydrates regularly, even small amounts, glycogen stores may stay full longer than you think. When someone begins a diet, especially a calorie-restricted one, the body starts drawing down these stores. But as long as even a moderate stream of carbohydrates enters the system, the glycogen tank keeps getting topped up. This prevents the body from needing to move on to the next stage of energy use. It creates a loop where you're dieting on paper, but your body is still operating on stored sugar. This is why some people see the scale drop quickly in the first few days of dieting. They're losing water weight tied to glycogen. Every gram of glycogen is stored with several grams of water. So, as glycogen depletes, water is released. This can create the illusion of fat loss, but it's simply part of the initial metabolic shift. The moment you eat carbohydrate-rich foods again, the glycogen stores refill and the weight often returns. It's easy to misunderstand this early stage because you may feel hungrier, more fatigued, or even slightly irritable as your glycogen levels start to decline. These symptoms make it feel like something dramatic is happening to your fat stores, but the reality is that your body is simply adjusting to the loss of quick fuel. Once glycogen is low, a more significant metabolic transition begins. But this transition can only happen if insulin levels also drop, if insulin remains elevated. Even depleted glycogen won't push the body into fat burning. Instead, the body may slow metabolism or break down muscle tissue to create glucose through a process called gluconeogenesis. This is one reason dieting without proper hormonal balance can feel miserable and unproductive. You're burning energy, but you may not be burning it from the right sources. Another thing to understand about this stage is that the body is reluctant to transition into fat burning too quickly because fat is a long-term survival reserve. Glycogen is a short-term energy supply. Fat is a long-term energy insurance policy. Quick access fuel ensures that the body can handle immediate activity, hunting, or survival challenges. Fat, on the other hand, was preserved for genuine deprivation or extended periods without food. Because of this evolutionary design, your body will resist dipping into fat if other fuel is still available and being used regularly. The moment you snack or eat something that spikes insulin, the body returns to storing and using glucose, delaying fat access even longer. This is why the beginning of a diet can feel confusing. You're putting in effort, but your body is still working its way through all the stored sugar you've built up over time. The early phase is not a fat-burning phase. It's a preparation phase. It's your body clearing the runway before the real fat-burning engine can switch on. The challenge is that most people never stay in this phase long enough or consistently enough to make it into the next stage. They diet for a few days, get discouraged, and return to old habits. The glycogen refills, insulin stays high, and the cycle begins again. The body never reaches a point where fat burning becomes a primary fuel strategy. Once glycogen is depleted and insulin is low, fat burning can finally begin, but this threshold is different for everyone. Some people reach it in a day. Others reach it in 2 or 3 days depending on their eating patterns, insulin sensitivity, and lifestyle factors like sleep and stress. What remains constant, however, is that no one burns fat in the early stages of dieting. They burn stored sugar first. And only after this fuel source is significantly reduced can the body consider switching to stored fat. Understanding this doesn't just reveal why belly fat takes time to burn. It helps you remain patient and persistent during the early phase where invisible internal changes are happening even if visible results have not yet appeared. Constant snacking and frequent meals keep insulin elevated, delaying belly fat access even during a diet. And this is one of the most overlooked reasons people struggle to lose weight despite feeling like they're eating healthy. It's not always about what you eat. Often it's about how often you eat. Your body's fat-burning system is governed by hormonal rhythms, and insulin sits at the center of that rhythm. Every time you eat, whether it's a big meal or a tiny snack, insulin rises. It doesn't matter if the food is low-calorie or low-fat. It doesn't matter if it's something as innocent as a handful of nuts or a piece of fruit. The simple act of eating triggers insulin because your body interprets every incoming nutrient as a signal that energy is being supplied and therefore needs to be processed and stored. This constant elevation of insulin keeps the fat locking mechanism turned on, trapping your fat in storage no matter how much you are trying to diet. Many people have been raised on the belief that it's healthier to eat small meals throughout the day. But this advice can backfire for anyone trying to burn belly fat. Each small meal keeps the body in a fed state. And as long as you are in a fed state, you are not in a fat-burning state. There is no neutral zone between the two. Your body is either storing energy or releasing it. Frequent eating means you are repeatedly shifting towards storage, never giving your body the long insulin-free window it needs to access fat stores, even if you reduce your calorie intake. If you snack all day or break your eating into constant mini-meals, the hormonal conditions needed for fat release never appear. This becomes especially problematic for belly fat, which is closely tied to insulin resistance. When insulin is always elevated, the fat around your midsection becomes even more stubborn, storing more energy as a defensive response to the constant hormonal signals. One of the reasons this pattern is so common is because modern food environments promote grazing. Food is everywhere within arm's reach, advertised constantly, engineered to be hyperpalatable, and packaged to be eaten on the go. People eat not just when they're hungry, but when they're bored, stressed, lonely, or simply because food is present. Each of these eating moments sends another insulin pulse through the bloodstream. Over time, these pulses accumulate and create a state of chronically elevated insulin. When insulin stays high, fat burning isn't just slowed, it's shut down. The body becomes dependent on incoming food for energy and gradually loses its ability to tap into stored fat efficiently. This is why people can feel exhausted, hungry, and shaky if they miss a snack. Their body has forgotten how to access fat because insulin has been blocking it for years. Another hidden challenge is that many snacks, even so-called healthy ones, are carbohydrate heavy. Granola bars, fruit smoothies, crackers, energy bites, low-fat yogurts. These foods can raise insulin more than people realize. Even snacks high in protein can trigger an insulin response. And while fats trigger the smallest insulin release, they are rarely eaten alone as simple fats. Instead, they are often combined with carbs or proteins, which drives insulin up anyway. Even drinks like juice, lattes, or flavored milk count as eating in your body's eyes because they require insulin to manage the incoming sugar. So, someone who thinks they're consuming a light snack is actually interrupting their fat-burning window repeatedly throughout the day. The body needs fasting periods, not starving periods, but breaks from incoming food to allow insulin to drop and give fat cells permission to release stored energy. When you go long enough without eating, insulin begins to fall naturally. Once it falls low enough, your body switches fuel sources and starts burning fat for energy. This process isn't triggered by hunger. It's triggered by hormonal shifts. But if you eat every 2 or 3 hours, even if you feel hungry or tired, The hormone never falls. The fat remains locked away. You can diet for weeks and still never reach a meaningful fat-burning phase because your eating schedule is constantly restarting the metabolic clock. This is also why late-night snacking is particularly harmful for fat loss. Eating at night spikes insulin at a time when your metabolism should be winding down. Your body ends up storing more energy from nighttime eating because the hormonal environment naturally shifts towards storage in the evening. Then in the morning, when you wake up and immediately eat again, insulin rises once more without ever having had a long enough window to fall overnight. The body stays trapped in a 24-hour cycle of elevated insulin. Breaking this cycle doesn't require extreme dieting. It requires spacing out meals so your body has a chance to use stored energy. Once you begin spacing your meals or removing snacks you truly need, you create the hormonal space necessary for insulin to fall. When insulin finally drops, the body can access fat for fuel. The belly region, which has been holding on to fat due to chronic insulin exposure, can finally begin releasing it. This is why people who stop snacking often notice changes in their midsection, even before their weight drops significantly. The body is finally doing what it's supposed to do, burning the energy it stored instead of simply storing more every time food touches your mouth. Hormones, not calories, decide when your body feels safe enough to unlock stored fat. And understanding this changes the entire way you think about dieting and weight loss. For decades, people have been taught that weight gain and weight loss are simple math problems. Eat less, move more, and the fat will melt away. But anyone who has actually tried to lose belly fat knows it doesn't work like that. You can eat less, you can exercise more, and still not lose the fat that seems glued to your midsection. That's because fat is not controlled by math. It's controlled by message. Your hormones are the messengers that tell your body how to use energy, how to store energy, and under what conditions it is allowed to release it. If those hormonal messages say store, then your body will store even in a calorie deficit. If those messages say burn, your body will burn even without extreme dieting. Learning how to influence those hormonal signals is far more powerful than any calorie chart or portion control strategy you could ever try. Insulin is the most well-known hormone in this process, but it is far from the only one. Cortisol, ghrelin, leptin, adrenaline, thyroid hormones, and even growth hormone all help determine whether your body feels like it should conserve energy or tap into stored fat. When you diet aggressively, your body's stress hormones often rise. This sends a signal that food is scarce and survival is priority. In response, your body may hold on to fat more tightly, especially belly fat, because abdominal fat is deeply connected to stress and cortisol. So, even if you are eating fewer calories, high cortisol can still block fat burning by creating a hormonal environment where the body feels unsafe releasing its reserves. This is why people who are stressed, sleep-deprived, or overwhelmed often struggle to burn fat no matter how disciplined their diet is. The calories are not the problem. It's the hormonal messages. Leptin and ghrelin also play crucial roles. Ghrelin is a hormone that makes you feel hungry, while leptin signals fullness and energy availability. When you diet too hard or too often, ghrelin can increase, making you feel constantly hungry, while leptin can decrease, convincing your body that you're running low on stored energy even when you're not. This combination triggers more cravings, more fatigue, and slower metabolism. It's the body's way of protecting itself. It doesn't know you're dieting for aesthetic reasons. It thinks you're facing a famine. And during perceived famine, the body shuts down fat burning to preserve fuel. Again, calories are not the deciding factor. Hormones are. Another overlooked hormone in fat loss is the thyroid. Your thyroid controls how much energy your body burns at rest. If your hormonal environment signals stress, starvation, or imbalance, thyroid activity can drop, slowing your metabolic rate. This means you burn fewer calories doing the same activities, not because you lack discipline, but because your hormones instructed your body to conserve energy. Many people mistake this slow metabolism for lack of progress, when in reality, their body is following hormonal instructions designed for survival. You can be eating less and losing less at the same time, not because you're doing something wrong, but because your hormones are prioritizing preservation instead of fat burning. Even growth hormone, which spikes at night and plays a major role in fat burning, can be affected by your lifestyle habits. Poor sleep, late-night eating, and chronic stress can reduce growth hormone levels. When this happens, your body misses out on one of its most powerful natural fat-burning opportunities. Belly fat is especially sensitive to these hormonal patterns. It is not just random fat storage. It is hormonally active fat that responds strongly to cortisol, insulin, inflammation, and stress signals. That's why belly fat is often the last to go. The abdominal area acts as a storage site for energy during times of hormonal imbalance, making it feel like the body is protecting that fat rather than releasing it. When your hormones shift into a balanced state, when insulin is lower, cortisol is managed, leptin and ghrelin are stable, and thyroid and growth hormone are functioning properly, the body begins to feel safe again. Safety is the key. Your body will not let go of stored fat if it believes you are in danger, starving, stressed, or unstable. But when the hormonal environment communicates that food is available, stress is under control, and energy is plentiful, fat burning becomes effortless. The body finally sees fat as fuel, not as a critical emergency resource that must be protected. This is why people who balance their hormones often report losing weight more consistently, feeling less hungry, and experiencing fewer cravings even without strict calorie counting. Understanding that hormones decide when fat burning begins frees you from the frustration of chasing calorie deficits. It shifts your attention to the habits and patterns that create hormonal balance. Meal timing, sleep, stress management, food quality, and giving your body periods without food so insulin can fall. When these elements come together, your hormones finally send a clear signal that it's safe to unlock stored fat, especially from the belly area that was once so resistant. Longer periods between meals create the metabolic conditions needed for fat burning to finally start, because your body requires time, not pressure, to shift from storing energy to releasing it. When you finish a meal, especially one containing carbohydrates, your insulin rises. This rise tells your cells to absorb glucose from the bloodstream and signals the body to store excess energy for later. Once this process begins, your body remains in a fed state for hours. During this fed state, fat burning is biologically impossible because insulin is doing exactly what it's designed to do: promote storage. Only when insulin drops low enough and stays low long enough does the body enter a fasting state where it can finally access stored fat, especially from stubborn belly areas. This shift doesn't happen the moment you stop eating. It happens gradually as the hormonal tide recedes. The longer you go without eating, the further insulin falls and the more readily your body turns toward its internal fuel reserves. Most people never reach this stage because they eat too frequently. Even if they are dieting, they're often grazing throughout the day, having small meals, drinks with calories, or quick snacks that reset the entire metabolic process. Every bite sends a small insulin pulse, even if the food is low carb. Every sip of sugary drink or a flavored latte restarts the digestive cycle. Even seemingly harmless eating, like grabbing a few nuts while cooking or snacking on fruit while working, can prevent insulin from falling. The body keeps returning to storage mode, never shifting to the internal burning of fat. This pattern is why many people say they're dieting but still feel hungry, tired, and stuck. They're always stuck in the early metabolic stage where the body is processing incoming food, not accessing stored fuel. When you lengthen the time between meals, the body is forced to rely on the energy already stored inside. At first, it uses glycogen from the liver. As glycogen continues to decline and no new energy arrives, insulin drops even more. This drop allows fat cells to open and release stored fatty acids. This is the point where real fat burning begins. But reaching this point requires patience and consistency. The body is designed to protect its fat stores until it feels confident that food is not continuously arriving. It needs a sustained signal that the fed state is over. Longer meal intervals give the body the quiet metabolic space it needs to receive that signal. If you eat every 3 hours or even every 4 hours, insulin may never get low enough to unlock fat properly. But when you go 5, 6, 8 hours or more without food, depending on your individual metabolism, insulin finally dips to a level where fat becomes accessible. Another powerful aspect of spacing meals is that hunger itself becomes more predictable and manageable. When you eat frequently, your hunger hormones get confused. Ghrelin, the hunger hormone, becomes more active at shorter intervals because your body begins to expect food every time you typically eat or snack. This leads to cravings, mood swings, and constant thoughts about food. But when you lengthen the gaps between meals, ghrelin begins to reset. It spikes only at real meal times and then drops, making hunger waves pass more smoothly. At the same time, fat burning produces ketones, which naturally suppress appetite and give you steadier energy. This is why some people feel less hungry, not more, when they give their body longer breaks between meals. Their hormones are finally shifting toward a fat-burning rhythm rather than remaining stuck in a constant craving cycle. Spacing meals also reduces inflammation and improves insulin sensitivity. When you're constantly digesting, your digestive system never gets a break, and your cells are repeatedly exposed to insulin. Over time, this can lead to insulin resistance, where cells stop responding properly to insulin signal. When that happens, the pancreas releases even more insulin to compensate, and fat burning becomes even more blocked. Longer intervals without eating help reverse this process. They give the pancreas time to rest, lower insulin levels naturally, and improve the body's sensitivity to insulin. This makes fat release easier and more efficient. Belly fat, which is closely linked to insulin resistance, begins to respond more quickly when the hormonal environment improves. In addition to lowering insulin, longer gaps between meals improve other hormones involved in fat burning. Growth hormone rises during fasting intervals, helping to preserve muscle and promote fat loss. Adrenaline increases slightly, giving you more alertness and energy while also helping mobilize stored fat. These changes are subtle but powerful. They do not happen when you're eating all day. They happen when your body senses space, stability, and a lack of constant food intake. The more consistently you space your meals, the more your metabolism adapts to this rhythm. Your body begins to trust the process. It learns to burn stored energy instead of demanding constant external fuel. This adaptation is what creates long-term fat loss success. People who adopt longer meal intervals often notice that their belly fat finally begins to change, not because they starved themselves or counted calories, but because they created the hormonal conditions necessary for fat burning. This approach works with biology rather than against it. When you stop feeding the body constantly and allow insulin to fall, you give your system the chance to do what it was designed to do: access stored fat and use it as fuel.